He ran away 12 years ago and left the only woman he ever loved standing alone. Now Caleb Wright is back, not because he wanted to come home, but because his father is dead. And the ranch he inherited comes with a cruel twist. His land is legally tied to hers, the woman he abandoned, the woman who waited and then stopped waiting. Lillian built her empire alone. She doesn't need him, she doesn't trust him, and she sure as hell doesn't want him back. But a powerful corporation is circling like vultures, ready to swallow both their ranches whole. They have money, lawyers, and politicians in their pockets. And they've made it clear, sell or be destroyed. Now, two people who can barely look at each other must stand side by side against an enemy that wants to crush them both. The question isn't whether they can save their land. The question is, can they survive each other long enough to try? Running away is easy. Staying to face what you broke, that takes real courage. And sometimes the person you hurt the most is the only one who can help you become who you were meant to be. This story reminds us, your past doesn't have to define your future. Second chances aren't given. They're earned. One choice at a time. If you believe in the power of redemption and starting over, hit that subscribe button and ring the bell. Drop a comment. Have you ever had to face someone you hurt and ask for another chance? Share this story with someone who needs to hear that it's never too late to make things right. Caleb felt like a stranger riding back into his own life. 12 years away had not been nearly long enough. Every step his horse took toward town felt like a step backward toward a man he had tried his best to forget. The funeral was quiet, just like his father, Samuel Wright, had been in life. Samuel was a hard man whose silence could cut deeper than any cuss word. Caleb had felt his father's disappointment clear across the country. Now his father was in the ground, and Caleb was the last of his line on a ranch that had been in the family for generations. The lawyer's office was tucked on Main Street. Caleb looked at his dusty reflection in the window. The town had put on a new face, but he knew its old bones. Inside, the lawyer, Thomas Brennan, looked as old as the hills, but his eyes were still sharp. Brennan did not waste time on pleasantries. He just pointed to a chair. "I wasn't sure you would show up," he said. Caleb sat down, feeling the trail dust on his clothes. "Let's just get to it." Brennan laid out the papers. He explained that the ranch house, the land, and the cattle all went to Caleb. The debts were manageable. Then the lawyer paused. "But the water rights," he said, "that is where things get tricky." He pulled out an old document from 1869. It was an agreement between Caleb's father and Marcus Moore about sharing water from Silver Creek. Caleb knew that name. Marcus was Lillian's father. "Marcus passed on 6 years ago," Brennan said. "His daughter, Lillian, got everything." The lawyer's office felt like it was spinning. Caleb held on to his chair to keep steady. "Lillian is a widow now," Brennan added. "She runs that ranch all by herself, and she is doing a fine job of it. She has become quite a force around here." Of course she had. Lillian was never one to sit still. Caleb had once planned to be part of her big dreams. But his father's cold disapproval and his own foolish pride had made him run away instead. "What does this all mean?" Caleb asked. Brennan laid it out plain and simple. The two ranches were legally tied together by that water agreement. During the recent drought, water had become more valuable than gold. Big outfits were trying to buy up water access, and Lillian's ranch had plenty. To sell his land or change a thing, Caleb needed her signature. He was stuck. He thought he was coming home to settle things and leave. Instead, he was tangled up in the very life he ran from. He had to go see her. Mrs. Hanson, he thought, the Lillian who had moved on without him. Riding to his family's ranch felt like riding through a gallery of ghosts. He saw the spot where he and Lillian shared their first kiss. The old house stood there, looking just as lonely as he felt. It was built to survive harsh winters and even harsher silence. Inside, the air was thick with dust, and memories of things left unsaid between him and his father. Then, on the fireplace mantel, Caleb saw it. It was a photograph of his mother and father. His father was looking at his mother with a softness, a kind of love Caleb had never seen on the man's face in his entire life. That old photograph showed a man Caleb barely knew. His father, Samuel, with a softness in his eyes from a time before bitterness took root. Beside it, a small wooden box held the answers. Inside were his mother's letters, tied up with string. His hand shook as he read the first one, written just 2 months before she passed. She pleaded with Samuel, saying the silence between him and Caleb was the real sickness. She wrote that Caleb was just like his father, proud, stubborn, and scared to death of letting down the ones he loved. She begged Samuel to see that the old family feud with the Moores was just poison, and that Lillian Moore was a fine woman for their son. She asked him not to let old sins ruin his son's future. Caleb read through a stack of his mother's desperate pleas to mend the rift between her husband and son. He learned the bad blood with the Moores went back generations, and his father's anger had nothing to do with Lillian herself. It was all tied to something that happened long before they were even born. The last letter, however, was from his father. It was written to Caleb just 3 months ago, but was never mailed. In it, Samuel admitted his silence had cost him everything. He confessed that his pride and some old grudge were the real reasons he'd pushed Caleb away. He wasn't chasing a girl. He was running from a father who was too hard on him because he was scared. Samuel confessed he was terrified of losing Caleb the same way he lost his own father, to a young man's reckless passion. He admitted that 40 years ago, he and Marcus Moore had fought over water rights. Both men were too stubborn to see they were both wrong. Their friendship died, but the legal ties between their ranches remained. He saw history repeating itself with Caleb and Lillian, 2 young folks caught in a war started by old men. He finally admitted that Lillian was a good woman who had built something special, all on her own. He knew the 2 ranches were tied together, and to destroy one would be to destroy them both. He ended the letter by telling Caleb he had a choice. Let the past win, or find the courage his mother had begged for. All those years, Caleb thought his father believed Lillian was beneath him. But it was never about her. It was about fear. Fear of history. Fear of loss. His father had been a flawed, fearful man who showed his love in a broken way, and Lillian, bless her heart, had paid the price. Caleb had left her in the dark, a coward who couldn't stand up to his own father. She had waited, then finally moved on, and built her own life. From his father's porch, Caleb could see the faint trail of smoke rising from Lillian's chimney, just 2 miles away. He had come home to sell the land and leave for good. But holding that letter, he knew running was no longer an option. It never solved anything. Some things, like their 2 ranches, were meant to be connected. Trying to cut them apart would only ruin them both. He knew he had to face her. What could he even say after 12 years of silence? An apology felt too small for the hurt he'd caused. He saddled his horse as the sun went down, his mind racing. He was about to knock on the door of the one person who had every right in the world to slam it right in his face. The 2-mile ride felt like a lifetime. Each hoofbeat was a reminder of the man he should have been. Her ranch was neat and strong, a testament to her hard work. You could see her grit in every fence post and every healthy animal. Lamplight glowed from her windows as he tied his horse and walked to the porch. Before his hand could even knock, the door swung open. Lillian stood there framed in the warm light. 12 years had made her stronger, her beauty hardened by grit and independence. Her dark eyes held no surprise at all, just a calm and steady gaze. She looked at him not as a lover, but as a stranger she'd been expecting. Her voice was even, without a trace of warmth. "Caleb Wright," she said. "I figured you'd work up the nerve to show your face here eventually." Her name felt odd in his mouth after so much time. Lillian. She stood in the doorway, not moving to let him pass. He figured she knew why he was there. She cut right to the heart of it. That is all of it. Her arms crossed, and he saw the hard work in her hands. "Your lawyer likely told you how our properties are tangled up." "He did. Now you are here to buy me out so you can sell this whole spread to some big outfit." "No," he said more firmly than he meant. "I am here to understand things first." She leaned against the doorframe. "What you need to understand is me, Caleb. I am not the girl you left behind 12 years ago. The water from Silver Creek starts on my land before it ever reaches yours. Our father's agreement means we're stuck with each other. He knew she would not make this easy. The Caleb I remember ran from trouble. He deserved that. I read my father's letters, Caleb said. He wrote to me before he passed, explaining the feud with your father. It was about them, not us. A flicker of understanding crossed her face. My daddy told me it was the most foolish thing two grown men ever fought over. They were both too proud to ever back down, so we paid the price for their pride. No, Lillian's voice was sharp. You paid for your own choices, Caleb. You are the one who left. You stopped writing. You decided your daddy's approval was worth more than your promises. The truth of her words settled on him like a heavy coat. You are right. He looked her straight in the eye. I was a coward, Lillian. I thought leaving was the strong thing to do. By the time I knew how wrong I was, I did not know how to come back. She watched him for a long moment. So why now? He asked. My father is gone, and I have a ranch I do not know what to do with. And coming back here made me see everything I threw away when I ran. Her tone was dry as dust. That does not change the facts. We are neighbors now, tied together by water and our father's ghosts. You want to sell, but I need to protect what I have built. Those two things do not go together. What if I do not want to sell? That seemed to surprise her. What? What if I stay? What if I work the ranch and honor the agreement? You have been gone 12 years, Caleb. This land does not wait for anyone. Then I will learn again. I was not always worthless. No, she said, you were just not dependable. The remark stung, but he understood it. I cannot change the past, he said. I can only choose to be a better man now. Why should I believe you? You should not, he admitted. Not based on words, but maybe you can judge me by my actions over time. She held a rifle in her hands, a quiet reminder that she had learned to protect herself. This valley is changing, Caleb. The big ranches are squeezing out the small ones for their water. I have fought off 3 offers this past year alone. I am not selling, not to them and not to you. This ranch was my father's dream, and now it is my life's work. I have made it succeed when everyone said a woman could not. She looked at him plainly. Do you see the problem? If you sell, whoever buys your land controls my water. They would ruin me. You do not trust me. Trust is earned, Caleb, and you used all yours up 12 years ago. Then let me earn it back, Caleb said. Not for us, but because it makes more sense to work together than to fight each other. She studied his face, searching for the truth. This is not about us, Caleb. Whatever we were is long dead. I am a widow. I built a life with a man who stayed. The words hit their mark. I know, he said quietly. Even if I could trust you, she continued. This is about survival. Our personal history does not matter when our ranches are at stake. He nodded. I agree. This is business. But that does not mean we have to be enemies. We can be neighbors, maybe even partners if things get bad enough. You talking about that old easement our daddies hashed out? Maybe that, or something more to it. I don't know your business or the troubles you are facing. But if them big outfits are sniffing around, having allies seems a whole lot smarter than standing alone. I have been standing alone for 4 years. I am still kicking. I am not saying you are not. I am just saying maybe we do not have to, if we could swallow our pride and work together. Lillian gave a dry laugh. Pride. That is mighty rich coming from you. I know what I was. But folks change, Lillian. They ought to get a chance to prove it. She went quiet. Caleb waited, letting her chew on it. Finally, Lillian lowered the rifle. All right, Caleb Wright, here is the deal. You stay, you work your land, and you honor that easement. And when you get tired and lonely and remember why you ran off in the first place, you come tell me before you disappear. Give me a fair heads up, fair enough, but we are not friends. We are neighbors with a piece of paper that says we have to get along. Nothing more. Understood? And if you even think about selling, I will tie you up in court so long that by the time the dust settles, there will not be a thing left for either of us. I am not selling. We will see about that. She paused at the door. Caleb. Yeah. Welcome home. Buckin. The words were not warm, but they were not cold either. As the door closed, Caleb saw something in her face. Not forgiveness, but maybe she was admitting that him being back mattered. He rode home under a sky full of stars you only see way out here. He could not shake the image of Lillian, her steady hand on that rifle, and the tall fences she had built around her heart. His daddy's house was dark and quiet, filled with ghosts and unspoken words. Caleb lit a lamp at the old kitchen table and looked over the papers. Deeds and water rights, tying him to Lillian whether they liked it or not. The wind howled outside, making the old house creak like it was lonely. A house built for a family, now holding just one man. Caleb thought of his mother's letters asking for courage and his father's confession, written too late to do them any good. But maybe not too late for the son who finally came home. He told Lillian he had changed and would prove it with his actions. It sounded good at the time. But sitting there alone, Caleb felt the true weight of it all. He was stuck in the very place he ran from, tied to the woman he left behind, facing the hardships he had spent 12 years dodging. If he ran this time, he would prove his father right. He would prove that the right men were just doomed to make the same mistakes, trapped by pride and fear. Caleb pulled out his father's letter and read it again. He saw the regret between the lines, the hope that his son might be a stronger man. I hope you are stronger than I was. It was not much, but it was a start. Tomorrow the work would begin, and he would find out if hope was enough. Morning came, with a cold bite that warned of the coming winter. Caleb woke up stiff in his father's old bed. He had spent the night reading old papers, learning the story of two families tied together by water and torn apart by pride. Promises made by lamplight still hold up in the day, and the ranch did not care about his second thoughts. He pulled on old work clothes and stepped out into the crisp air. The cattle needed moving. The barn door hung sideways from a long-forgotten storm, and the fences near the creek were rusted through. His father had let things go in his last years. The ranch was still breathing, but you could see the shape of a lonely man's heart in every busted hinge and deferred chore. There was no point in keeping up a legacy with no one to leave it to. Caleb got to work, not for forgiveness, but as a promise. Caleb was getting back to real work, the kind that meant something more than a paycheck. He fixed the barn door and cleaned the trough, feeling a forgotten satisfaction in mending his own place. By noon, his back ached and his hands were raw, but it was a good hurt. That's when he heard a horse approaching. It was Lillian, sitting tall on her mare. She looked tough but tired, wearing men's work pants and a warm jacket. "Figured I'd check if you'd packed it in overnight," she called out, not getting down. "Still here," Caleb replied, suddenly aware of the dirt on his clothes. "Fixing what I can." She glanced at his handiwork. "I see that. You always were a hard worker when you put your mind to it. The trick was always getting you to put your mind to it." He walked closer, and he couldn't help but notice the pistol on her hip and the rifle in its scabbard. She came prepared for trouble. "Can I help you with something?" he asked. She pulled a folded paper from her pocket and tossed it down. "This arrived this morning. Thought you ought to see it." Caleb unfolded it and knew right away it was trouble from the fancy letterhead. Consolidated Ranching Corporation, based in Chicago. He scanned the lines, his jaw growing tighter with every word. It was an offer to buy the Moore Ranch, polite as can be, but with a nasty undertone. They were offering way more than it was worth, but there was a catch. The big money only came if Lillian could also deliver the purchase rights to his ranch within 60 days. "They're trying to force a package deal," he said, looking up at her. "They're using you to pressure me." Her voice was bitter. "That's their third letter in 6 months. Each one gets pushier than the last." "You're not selling," he stated. "Of course I'm not." "But they ain't just asking anymore, Caleb," she explained. "They're making moves. The drought gave them an opening to start buying up water rights all over. This is bigger than some old squabble between us. They see your father's passing as their chance to grab your land from a new owner who might be eager to sell. Let them come. he said flatly. Don't be a fool, Lillian snapped. These aren't local boys you can outstare at the saloon. This is a corporation with pockets so deep they can wait you out or starve you out. Then what do you suggest? I suggest you get smart. Come to the town meeting tomorrow night. Hear what folks are saying. Understand the stakes before you go making promises you can't keep. I don't make promises I can't keep. Not anymore. She studied him for a long moment, searching his face. We'll see. The meeting's at 7. Don't you be late. The next evening, Caleb rode into town as the sun painted the mountains purple and gold. The white steeple of the church was the center of everything. A dozen horses were already tied up outside, and warm light spilled from the windows. Inside, the pews were nearly full of ranchers and townfolk, their faces etched with worry. Caleb found a spot in the back, nodding to a few men he barely recognized. He could feel their whispers behind their hands. Lillian was sitting 3 rows ahead, her back ramrod straight. She didn't turn when he came in, but he saw her shoulders tense up just a bit. She knew he was there. The meeting started with the usual business, fence disputes and water reports. But then Thomas Brennan stood up, and the room went dead silent. I reckon we all know the real reason we're here tonight, Brennan said. The Consolidated Ranching Corporation has been making offers all through the valley. He let that hang in the air for a moment. And they're not going away. How many have sold? A voice called out. 6 properties in the last year, Brennan answered. The Harrison Place, the old Jenkins Ranch, and the Donovan Spread, among others. That's nearly 40% of this valley's water access now in corporate hands. What are they doing with it? Another asked. Consolidating. They're building something so big none of us can compete with it. And it's all legal, done with contracts most of us can't afford to fight. Some of us have no interest in selling. Lillian's voice cut through the nervous chatter like a knife. Her words carried a strength that made men listen. And I respect that, Mrs. Hanson, Brennan replied. But we have to be realistic. They control enough water now to make life very difficult for those who don't cooperate. Are you suggesting we have no choice? Lillian stood up, and every eye in the room turned to her. That we should just hand over our land because fightin' is hard? I'm suggesting we need a strategy, Brennan countered. Stubbornness built this valley, she shot back, her voice rising with passion. It carved our homes out of the wilderness. And now you want us to abandon it because some businessmen from Chicago have deep pockets and fancy lawyers? From where I'm standing, it sounds like we're being told to accept defeat before the fight has even started. The meeting had barely gotten started. An old-timer named Henry turned around, his face etched with worry. Ms. Hanson, he said, we all know you got grit, but you're out there all alone. The rest of us have families. Selling out ain't defeat, it's just surviving. Lillian Hanson stood her ground. Surviving on what terms, Henry? You sell to that corporation, and this valley, this whole community, is gone. The arguments flew back and forth, splitting the room right down the middle. That is when a slick voice cut through the noise from the back. Before Caleb even turned, he knew he was not going to like the man it belonged to. If I might offer a different point of view, the man said. He was young, dressed in a suit that cost more than a good horse, and his hands had never seen a hard day's work. Caleb disliked him on sight. The man said, My name is Richard Thornton. I represent the Consolidated Ranching Corporation. He gave everyone a polished smile. I am here to provide facts. We are not trying to destroy your community. We want to bring in new money, better ways of doing things, and real opportunity. Underutilized? Lillian's voice was sharp as barbed wire. We have been using this land just fine for generations. Thornton did not flinch. With respect, ma'am, small ranches are not efficient. The corporation can offer you something you cannot get on your own, a steady paycheck. Caleb felt his jaw tighten. The man's words were smooth as creek water, but they hid a deep disrespect for their whole way of life. You are selling stability, Caleb said, his own voice surprising him. But what you are really offering is dependence. Thornton's sharp eyes landed on him. And you are? Caleb Wright, Samuel Wright's boy. Ah, yes. A difficult time for you, Thornton said without a hint of warmth. Which is why we are prepared to make you a very generous offer for your land. I am not interested in selling, Caleb said flatly. Perhaps not today, Thornton replied. But I should mention your neighbors, the Harrisons, already sold to us. We now control the water rights next to your property. That could make things complicated for you. Are you threatening me? Caleb asked, his voice low. Just stating facts, Mr. Wright. Water flows downhill. That is just the natural consequence of owning property. The whole room watched, dead silent. Caleb looked that man square in the eye. Then I suggest you study your water laws, Mr. Thornton. The Wright Ranch has easement agreements that are 40 years older than your entire corporation. You want to fight over water rights, I will see you in court. Thornton's smile faltered. Legal battles are expensive. Cooperation means respect, Caleb shot back. You are not offering cooperation. You are offering surrender. Thornton's face hardened. That slick city polish was cracking. You are new to this, Mr. Wright. I would hate to see you make a mistake based on pride. That is when Lillian stepped up beside Caleb. And I would hate for you to underestimate how much we value what is ours, she said, her voice ringing with strength. This valley is not for sale. Strong words for someone facing a drought, Thornton said coolly, regaining his composure. We can survive lean years. Can you? I have survived worse than any drought, Lillian declared. Brennan, the meeting leader, finally stepped in. I think we have heard enough from Mr. Thornton. Thornton gave a slight bow. My offer remains open, he said, and with a final look that was both a promise and a threat, he walked out. The moment the door shut, the room exploded. Caleb turned to Lillian. You did not have to do that, he said. Yes, I did, she replied, her eyes firm. He was threatening us both, and now you have made yourself a target. I was a target the second I decided to stay, Caleb said. She gave him a long look, then a slow nod. After most folks had left, Caleb and Lillian gathered with the few other ranchers who refused to sell. There was Henry Blackwood, Martha Reeves, and James Chen. They were outnumbered and outgunned. We have to get organized, Martha said, her voice steady. They will just pick us off one by one if we do not. Organize how? Henry asked, looking defeated. We are just ranchers. What power do we have? Lillian looked at each of them, a spark of hope in her eyes. Water, she said simply. We control the creeks and the headwaters. If we stand together and coordinate our rights, their whole plan dries up. They'll just buy the land right upstream from us, James said plainly. They have more money than we'll ever see. Not if we tie it up in legal knots first, Lillian shot back. We create water agreements that make it impossible for them to choke us out. Brennan just shook his head. That would mean every last rancher has to be on board. Caleb spoke up, his voice steady. Let them take us to court. The law moves slow. A delay might be all we need to show folks their big corporate model is all hat and no cattle. Henry looked tired. I have grandkids to think about. I cannot afford to lose my ranch over a point of pride. You will lose it anyway, Lillian insisted. Is it better for your grandkids to work for wages on land you once owned? The talk went in circles, but by the time folks shuffled out into the cold, something had changed. There was a spark of a fight left in them yet. The street was dark and quiet, with stars so bright they threw shadows on the ground. Well, that went smooth, Caleb said with a grin. Lillian did not smile. We are not beat yet. That is something. She paused while untying her horse. You meant what you said back there about staying to fight? I meant it. Caleb met her gaze in the starlight. I am doing this because it is the right thing to do. This land is worth fighting for. And yes, he added softly, because I owe this place. And I owe you. For a long moment, Lillian just looked at him. All right, then. We work together as neighbors. We share what we know and we stand together. Agreed. And Caleb, she said, swinging up into her saddle, Do not make me sorry I trusted you. I will not get let down by you a second time." She was gone before he could answer, leaving him with the heavy weight of his promise. On the ride home, Caleb thought about the whole mess. Thornton's slick threats, the fear in his neighbor's eyes, and Lillian's fragile trust. He was tied to something much bigger than just saving his own hide. This was about protecting a whole way of life from men who only saw dollar signs in the dirt. When he finally got to his ranch, cold and bone-tired, a letter was waiting on his porch. It was from the Consolidated Ranching Corporation. He did not open it. He just sat on the steps, holding that envelope, feeling the weight of his father and his grandfather on his shoulders. But for the first time, he felt a clear sense of purpose. He knew what he had to fight for. Tomorrow he would read their threats, but tonight he just sat on his father's porch and held on to that feeling. The letter sat on his kitchen table all morning, a white envelope that felt heavier than a rock. After a cold cup of coffee, Caleb finally tore it open. The words were cold and professional, offering $60,000 for his ranch. He had 30 days to accept. It was their final offer. The last paragraph sent a chill down his spine. It said they were aware of his little meeting, his apparent alliance with other ranchers, and that such actions would only make things harder on everyone. They knew. They were already watching his every move. That letter was pure poison, dressed up in polite words. It told Caleb that Lillian Hansen was nearly broke after 3 years of drought and bad luck. The corporation was trying to paint her as a weak link, someone he could not count on. It made Caleb want to ride over and shove that letter right down Thornton's throat. Instead, he rode to Lillian's ranch. He found her in the barn, covered in grease, fighting with a worn-out piece of equipment. "If you came to tell me you are selling, you can just save your breath," she said, not even looking up. "I am not selling." He stepped closer. "But you ought to read this." She wiped her hands, took the letter, and her jaw tightened as she read. She handed it back, her eyes hard as stone. "Well," she said, her voice tight, "they sure do their homework." "Are you in that much trouble?" Caleb asked. Her eyes flashed with fire. "What business is that of yours?" "It is my business if they are using it against us," he said. "I need to know what we are up against." She turned back to the machine. "Yes, the last few years have been tough. My equipment is old and my pockets are not deep. But I'm still standing, Caleb. I do not need you coming over here and questioning me because of some snake's letter." "I am not questioning you, Lillian. I'm trying to help." Her face softened just a bit, showing the exhaustion she tried so hard to hide. For 3 years she had been fighting the land, the banks, and men who thought a woman could not run a ranch. "You want to help?" she asked. "Then stop treating me like some damsel in distress." "That is not what I am doing," he said quietly. "I would rather be tied to a partner I can trust, one who trusts me enough to tell me the whole truth." Lillian stared at him for a long moment, then set her wrench down. She walked over to a messy workbench. "I have lost 3 harvests to drought," she said, her voice flat. "My equipment is barely holding on, and the bank loan is a heavy weight. My neighbors are just waiting for me to fail. But you are still here." "Barely," she admitted, turning to face him. "I do most of the work myself and fix things with wire and a prayer." "Yes, I am vulnerable. Is that the truth you wanted to hear?" "It is," he said. "So I can figure out how to make sure neither of us goes down." He stepped closer and she held her ground. "You think I'm looking for a way out?" she asked, her voice tight. "I know I've given you reason to," he said softly. "But what if I am trying to stay, to help build something that lasts? Then you're a fool. The odds are not in our favor. Well, I would rather be a fool who fought than a coward who ran." Something in her eyes softened. "The harvester is broken," she admitted. "Been down for a week. That corporation's letter came right when I was at my weakest." Caleb walked over to the machine. "This is a Master Sonson model, is it not? I worked on these for 2 years when the cattle market went south." He knelt and looked underneath. Your problem is not the bolt. It is the drive shaft behind it. The thing is cracked. I know, she sighed. I just cannot afford a new one. What if we reinforce it, he suggested. It will not last forever, but it will get you through the season. She looked at him, not quite believing. You can do that? I can sure try, he said. They worked side by side through the long afternoon. His hands remembered old skills learned from hard times, and Lillian knew every inch of her equipment. As the sun began to set, the drive shaft was braced with a solid weld. It was not pretty, but it was strong. That ought to get you through the harvest, Caleb said, wiping grease from his hands. Thank you, she said, her voice sincere. You did not have to do this. We are neighbors, he replied. We have to look out for each other. Is that all we are? The question hung in the air. I do not know what we are, Lillian, he said carefully. I just know we are two people trying to survive against something bigger than both of us. Maybe that is a start. She nodded. Martha Reeves stopped by. She wants to organize a water compact, get some legal protection before the corporation makes its next move. That is a start, Caleb agreed, but it means convincing folks not to sell. And why would they listen to you, she asked. You have only been back 2 weeks. Because I am proof that running away solves nothing, he said, his voice low. I spent 12 years building nothing, belonging nowhere. If I can stop one person from making that mistake, it will be worth it. Lillian studied him in the fading light and finally gave a small nod. All right. Martha is having a meeting for the holdouts in 3 days. You should be there. I will, he promised. And Caleb, do not give any speeches about second chances. These people only care about survival. Speak to that. He rode home as dusk settled over the valley. The work had left him with a good kind of tired, the feeling of having done something that mattered. But that feeling died when he saw the horse tied to his porch. A man sat on his steps, a silhouette against the light from his own house. It was Thornton, making himself at home where he was not wanted. You are trespassing, Caleb said, swinging down from his horse. I thought a private talk would be more productive, Thornton said with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Say what you need to say, and then get off my land. Thornton lit a cigar. The corporation is losing its patience. We have made generous offers. We are tired of wasting time. Is that supposed to scare me? It is supposed to make you think. You have allied yourself with Mrs. Hanson, but she is using you. She is using your guilt to drag you into a losing fight. Caleb fought to keep his voice steady. You are wasting your time. I am not selling. Not even when winter comes? Thornton pressed. Not even when you realize you are in over your head, and the other ranchers start to sell, leaving you all alone? He leaned forward. You are not being noble, son. You ran from this place because it was hard. Now you're running back because you feel guilty. It is just another kind of cowardice. You do not know a thing about me. I know men, Thornton said coolly. I know the stories they tell themselves. You are here because leaving made you feel small, and you think staying will make you feel big again. Get out, Caleb said, his voice a low growl. I will go, Thornton said, standing up. But understand this. The corporation does not lose. We will wait you out. We will buy up all the land around you. And when you finally come to us, broken and defeated, we will not be offering $60,000 anymore. We will offer half that. He climbed onto his horse with unhurried confidence. Your father was stubborn too. Look where it got him. Dead and alone. Thornton rode off into the night. Caleb stood there in the dark, trembling with anger and a cold fear. He feared that some of what the man had said might just be the truth. The next morning, Martha Reeves and Henry Blackwood rode into his yard. Heard Thornton paid you a visit, Martha said straight away. Wanted to make sure you had not folded. Folks notice when those corporate types come calling, Henry added. Thornton has been visiting everyone who has not sold. I am not selling, Caleb said. Henry looked old and tired. They came after my granddaughter, offered her a good job in town, but made it clear it would be unwise to say no. They are using my family to pressure me. They are not just buying land, Martha said, her face grim. They are buying people, using jobs and debts to make it too expensive to say no. So what do we do? Caleb asked. We create our own leverage, she replied. We form a cooperative. We share equipment, buy supplies together, and combine our cattle sales to get better prices. It is the only way to stay afloat without surrendering. You think it will work? Martha's voice was like iron. My husband built our ranch from dust. I am not giving it up now just because some suits from the city decided our land is a good investment. It was a long morning of planning, but it felt like they were finally building something instead of just fighting back. For the first time since he had come home, Caleb felt a flicker of real hope. He was in the kitchen when Lillian rode up, her horse breathing hard. They filed a claim, she said, swinging out of the saddle. The corporation is challenging the easement between our ranches. They say it is outdated. Can they do that? They can tie us up in court for years, she said. He could see the exhaustion in her every move, the heavy price of fighting a war on all fronts. I am tired, Caleb. I am tired of fighting, Lillian confessed, her voice low, tired of always looking over my shoulder. You do not have to do it alone, Caleb said gently. I have been alone for a long time, she replied, the hurt plain in her voice. The people who offer help usually vanish when the ground gets shaky. Caleb took the hit. He deserved it. I cannot change the past, but I am here now. And I am staying. Not to make things right for me, but because you deserve to have someone in your corner. Pretty words. Then let me show you, Caleb insisted. We do this together. We make it clear that a fight with one of us is a fight with all of us. Lillian studied him for a long time, the conflict clear in her eyes. All right, she finally said. But you need to understand. I am not the girl who waited for you 12 years ago. We are partners because we have to be, nothing more. The second you look like you are about to run, this deal is off. Fair enough, Caleb agreed. Martha's meeting is tomorrow night, she said as she turned to leave. Be there. Then she paused. And Caleb, thank you. For the harvester, and for not selling out to Thornton. It means something. He watched her ride off, knowing that a little bit of gratitude from Lillian was worth more than gold. That night on his porch, he looked out at the land. It was his, but he knew he had to earn it all over again. The corporation wanted to turn this valley into a number on a spreadsheet. But it was more than that. It was home. It was history. Caleb finally understood that running was easy. Staying, that was the hard part. It took everything you had. Tomorrow he would go to Martha's meeting. He would stand with his neighbors. He would stay model. He had to show Lillian through hard work what his words never could. And if that corporation wanted a fight, he would give them one. Not with fists, but with the grit of folks who know their land is worth more than any dollar amount. Some things just are not for sale. The stars watched from above, silent witnesses to the struggles down below. The cold finally drove him inside, where he dreamt of free-flowing water and fences that brought neighbors together. Martha Reeves's place was tucked in a valley, her house lit up and warm. Inside, the air was thick with tension and stale coffee. These were the last ranchers holding out against the corporation's offers. Lillian was already there, talking by the fireplace. She nodded at Caleb when he walked in. She gave Caleb a quick nod before turning back to James. It was clear they were allies in this room, but not quite partners. Martha, with the get-it-done air of a woman used to being in charge, called the meeting. Y'all know why we're here. The corporation is coming after the Wrightmore easement to break us. If they win, every one of our water rights is on the chopping block. We have to fight back, and we have to do it together. Henry Blackwood piped up. What kind of fight? Lillian answered. We pool our money for a lawyer. This fight is on my land and Caleb's for now, but the outcome affects everyone. A woman Caleb did not know spoke, her voice tight. "We cannot afford to fight them forever. They have deep pockets, we do not." James cut in. "Then we make it cost them. We hit them from all sides. They challenge us here, we challenge their permits over there." "That is just playing dirty," someone muttered. "No," Caleb said, his voice drawing every eye in the room. "That is playing smart. They are using the law against us, so we will use it right back." An old rancher, Tom Sutton, scoffed. "Big talk from a man who has only been back 3 weeks. It is easy to talk tough when you have not been losing money for 3 years. "You are right," Caleb said, facing him. "I ran, so my opinion is not worth much. But I am here now, and I have time and energy. Let me be the one to file the papers and face their lawyers. Let me be the target so y'all can keep your ranches going." Lillian watched him, a calculating look in her eyes, as if wondering what his real reasons were. Martha spoke slowly. "That could work. They expect us to defend. If we attack, we change the whole game." But Henry warned, "You poke a bear, you might get mauled." "And you do not get far by running from one either," Lillian said quietly. "We have been giving up ground for too long, hoping they would be satisfied. It is time to stand and fight." The talk went on for hours. Some folks were fired up, ready for a real fight. Others were just plain tired, worn down, and thinking about selling. But in the end, they all agreed. They would start the fund and fight back, using the law just like Thornton did. When the meeting finally broke up, Caleb felt the weight of his new job. He had put himself front and center, the man who would take the heat while everyone else worked their land. It felt right. He had more time than the others, and a powerful need to prove himself. He was heading for his horse when Lillian found him in the dark. "That was either real brave or real dumb," she said. "Making yourself the bullseye like that." "Probably dumb," he admitted. "But I have less to lose and everything to prove." He faced her in the starlight. "You said you would be done with me if I ran again. This is me not running. Or it is you trying to be a hero to make up for the past. Does it matter why, if it helps?" She was quiet a long moment. "It matters to me. I do not want your guilt, Caleb. I do not want you sacrificing yourself for a cause you do not believe in." "What if I do believe in it?" he asked. "Then I would say you are finally growing up." Her voice softened just a little. "But you be careful. They will not fight fair. They will dig up your past and use it all against you. Let them try." Lillian looked at him, then gave a slow nod. "All right, but you need to understand. If you take this on, you see it through. No quitting when it gets tough. You are the face of this fight now, until the end." "Agreed," Caleb said. She stepped closer, and in the dim light he could see the hope and weariness in her eyes. "Thank you," she said, "for staying." Then she was gone, riding off into the night. Caleb stood there, feeling the burden of his promise and the chance he might finally become the man he was supposed to be. The corporation did not waste any time. 2 days later, Caleb was served with papers. They accused him of trespassing and conspiracy. The charges were nonsense, just a clear message that they knew he was leading the fight and they were coming for him. Brennan, his lawyer, read the papers and sighed. "It is pure harassment. They know it will not stick." Brennan, Caleb's lawyer, laid it out plain. "Their lawsuit won't stick, but they will drag you through the mud for months. They want to make life so miserable that you just give up. And if you fight back, it just plays into their hands, keeping you tangled in court. Officially, I have to tell you to think about their offer. Drop your fight, and they will drop the charges." Brennan's face hardened. "But unofficially, I say you fight like hell. If they silence you this way, nobody in this valley is safe." Caleb looked out at the town he grew up in, now dotted with corporate logos. He saw strangers where familiar faces should be. It was becoming a company town. "I will fight," he said. Brennan nodded. "Then get ready. They will dig into every corner of your life, looking for dirt." Caleb sighed. "There is plenty to find. Those last 12 years were not my proudest." "Then we get out in front of it," Brennan countered. "We will paint you as the son who came home to protect his father's land from greedy outsiders." That sounds like lying. That is survival. They are already calling you a troublemaker. We have to give people a different story, a reason to stand with you. News of the lawsuit spread like a grass fire. Some folks got scared, figuring it was foolish to oppose the corporation. Others saw it as a sign that the resistance was actually working, that it was a real threat. That evening, Lillian rode up to his ranch, her face tight with anger. "They are coming after you because of me," she said flatly. "Because we are allies." Caleb shook his head. "They are coming after me because I stood up to be the target. This was always the plan." "Planning it and living through it are two different things," she shot back. "They are going to tear you apart, Caleb. They will use every mistake you have ever made to destroy you. Are you ready for that?" "Are you?" he asked, meeting her gaze. "Because they will use our history against both of us. They will say, I left you, that our past is messy. They will twist it into something ugly, making it seem like I'm only here out of guilt." "I can handle whatever they say about me," Lillian said. "Then trust me to handle it too." She paced around the yard, kicking at the dust. "There is something you need to know about why I married David Hansen." Caleb stood perfectly still. He knew this was important. "He was a kind man," she said softly. "When everyone told me a woman could not run this ranch, David believed in me. He offered me a partnership when I needed it most. I respected him, and I cared for him. We built a good life. But I never loved him the way I loved you. He knew it, and I knew it. He was always my second choice. A part of me was always waiting for the man who was never coming back. Lillian, I need to finish. When David died, I mourned a good man. But I also felt relief. Relief that I could stop pretending to feel something that was not there. And that guilt eats me alive. He gave me 4 years of loyalty, and all I could give him was gratitude. What kind of person does that make me?" "It makes you human," Caleb said gently. "You did the best you could in a terrible situation. The corporation will use it," she warned. "They will paint me as a cold woman who uses men and you as the fool who came back for her." Caleb closed the distance between them. "Let them try. I do not care what they say about me, and I sure do not care what they say about you. I know the truth. You are a survivor who has earned the right to protect what is yours." "Those are just words," she whispered. "They are true words. And if they want to attack our past, it just proves one thing. They are getting desperate because we are actually winning." The trial started 3 weeks later. Brennan had been right. The corporation threw everything they had at Caleb. They brought up every job he had lost, every town he had drifted through, painting him as an irresponsible drifter. They claimed he was just a pawn in Lillian Hansen's game to avoid losing her ranch. The accusations hurt because they were twisted pieces of the truth. But Brennan fought back. He brought in other ranchers who testified about Caleb's hard work since he came home. Martha Reeves talked about how he organized the water compact. James Chen described how Caleb's skill saved Lillian's harvest. Then Lillian herself took the stand. Her testimony was calm and sharp. She admitted their history was complicated, but said Caleb had earned his place back here through his actions. She called the corporation's claims an insult to every rancher in the valley who had chosen to stand together. The trial dragged on for weeks, eating up time and money Caleb did not have. His own ranch was neglected as he sat in a courtroom day after day. Across the room, Thornton from the corporation watched with a satisfied look. He knew that even if he lost the case, he was winning the war by making it too expensive and exhausting for anyone to fight him. In the end, the judge threw out all the charges. He criticized the corporation for wasting the court's time. Caleb was awarded a small amount of money that did not even cover his lawyer's bills. On paper, it was a victory. In reality, it was a clear and simple warning. The corporation could do this to him or anyone else whenever they wanted. This was only the beginning of the fight, but it is meant to bleed you dry. Caleb walked out of the courthouse feeling tired. He had won, but it did not feel like a victory. Lillian was waiting for him. "Congratulations," she said. "You won." "Did I? It sure does not feel like it." You did not lose, she corrected. In this fight, that is a win. They rode back toward the valley under a sky that promised snow. His ranch, when they got there, looked neglected. I have got weeks of work to do before the first real freeze, he said. I will help, she offered. He looked at her, surprised. You have your own place to run. You helped me. This is me paying you back, she said. Besides, they made our partnership a weapon in that courtroom. We can either let it tear us apart, or we can show them it just made us stronger. Is that what this is? Strategy? It is what needs to be done. I reckon it is time we stop keeping our distance. You stayed, Caleb, when any other man would have run for the hills. That means something. I am saying we need to be partners for real. We have to stand together if we want to survive what is coming. She got off her horse and headed for his barn like she owned the place. We can start by getting this ranch ready for winter. They worked side by side as the sun went down, a comfortable quiet between them. It was not romantic, but it felt solid. As dark settled in, Lillian stopped at the barn door. You know they are coming back for us, Caleb. This was just round one. I know, he said. And you are still staying. She nodded, a new understanding in her eyes. I am. It was not trust, not yet, but it was the ground trust could be built on. Well then, I suppose we had better get ready for round two. Caleb stood there a long while, realizing he had passed some kind of test. The whole mess was supposed to break him, to prove he was weak. Instead, it made him show everyone he was a man of his word. He had stood his ground when running would have been the easy way out. He had not won her forgiveness, but he had earned her respect. It might not ever be love like when they were young, but this partnership felt like more than enough. The first snowflakes of winter started to fall, promising a long, hard season ahead. The corporation would be back. Thornton had made that plain with the smirk on his face in court. But for the first time, Caleb felt ready. He was not just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for the land, for his neighbors, and for the chance to rebuild something real with Lillian. He felt a flicker of hope, and knew it would have to be enough to see them through the winter. That winter came on hard, the kind of cold that bit right through you. But the daily work of breaking ice and feeding cattle no longer felt like a punishment. It felt like purpose. Lillian was true to her word. By January, their two ranches were working as one. But the corporation had gone quiet, and that worried Caleb more than their fighting had. The answer came one frozen February morning. Their lawyer, Brennan, showed up with bad news. They have filed for a territorial water commission, he said, stomping the snow off his boots. They are claiming the way we use our water is inefficient and bad for the land. It sounds reasonable, Caleb said. Brennan shook his head. It is a brilliant, nasty trick. They are dressing up a corporate takeover as environmental protection. This commission would have the power to control all the water in this valley, overriding our rights. And you can guess who will be running that commission. A cold that had nothing to do with the weather washed over Caleb. How do we fight it? We have to prove their science is bunk, and that our ways have worked for generations. But that takes money and experts we do not have. When Lillian heard, she got right to the point. How much time we got? Brennan looked grim. 3 months. They are pushing it through fast. 3 months to beat their money and their politicians. Lillian's voice was flat. They have got us cornered. Not yet, Caleb said. We know this land. That has to count for something. We need more than being right, Caleb, she said. We need a plan. They called a meeting of every rancher who had not sold out yet, all 23 of them crowded into Martha's big barn. The faces looking back at Caleb were worn down with fear and exhaustion. The corporation thinks they have won, Caleb started, his voice ringing through the quiet barn. They think they have us beat with their fancy reports and paid-off politicians. Maybe they do, a man muttered from the back. We are just ranchers. You are right, Caleb said. We cannot fight their battle, so we will fight ours. He unrolled a huge map of the valley. They say our water management is a problem. Well, we are going to prove them wrong. We will show him how our system has kept this valley alive, precisely because the folks who live here are the ones in charge. The folks who depend on the water ought to be the ones managing it. That is just our word against their hired guns, said Henry, sounding bone-tired. Politicians listen to whoever has the fanciest papers and the deepest pockets. Then we will give 'em something papers cannot argue with. Proof. Hard data. We will show 'em how corporate water management is poison to the land. Lillian stood next to Caleb, pointing at a map. The Harrison place, the Donovan spread, all of 'em sold. We will document what the corporation has done since they took over. We will show the dead grass and the dry creeks. We will build a case that they are the real threat. James Chen spoke up. My cousin works at the land office. He might get us the water usage reports. And my son is a surveyor, Martha added. His testimony would count for something. One by one, the ranchers started offering help, connections, and time they did not have. Caleb watched as folks who had been beaten down found a reason to fight for something bigger than themselves. By the time the meeting was over, they had a long shot of a plan, a real Hail Mary that would test every last one of them, but it was a fighting chance. Over the next few weeks, Caleb learned all about water flow and the fine print of land regulations. He and Martha's son rode the valley, taking notes on what the corporation was doing. At night, he'd study water records a friend had slipped him, seeing the ugly truth in the numbers. Lillian was right there with him, her sharp eyes catching things he missed, turning their pile of facts into a story that made sense. In those late nights, fueled by coffee and sheer grit, something started to change. Their hands would brush reaching for a paper, and for a second neither would pull away. One night he found her asleep at his kitchen table. He just put a blanket over her, his heart aching with how much he had missed her, how much he needed her there. But they never said a word about it. There was too much on the line. The corporation didn't take their meddling lightly. Thornton showed up at Caleb's ranch one morning with a couple of city lawyers who looked like they'd sue their own mothers. He sneered, still playing the hero, I see. Caleb stood his ground. Still on my own land, Thornton. Thornton's smile was pure ice. For now. But your little crusade is getting dangerously close to slander. We have invested a fortune in this land, and your tall tales could be considered defamation. Caleb shot back. The truth ain't defamation. You would have to prove that truth in court, with more than just back-of-the-napkin figuring, Thornton said. You won't because you know a real look would show we're using science while your old ways are what's really hurting this valley. If that's all you came to say, you wasted a trip. I came to give you one last chance. Thornton held up a document. $100,000 for this place. That is more than this ranch is worth, and the offer is only good for today. Take it. Start over somewhere new. Caleb's voice was low. I don't want to start over somewhere new. Then you are a fool. We are going to win the water vote. When we do, your deal with Mrs. Hanson will not be worth the paper it is written on. We will control the water, and folks who gave us trouble will find their wells running dry. You will lose it all. Your ranch, your friends, and whatever sad little reunion you think you're having with Lillian. The insult about Lillian hit a nerve, but Caleb kept his cool. You don't know a thing about me and Lillian. I know she is using you because she needs your water rights and a public face for her fight. The second this is over, win or lose, she will be gone. You are useful, but you are not wanted. Now get off my land. Thornton pocketed the paper. Your funeral. By the way, tell Mrs. Hanson. Thornton left Caleb standing there in his own yard, shaking with a rage so deep it felt like a sickness. That corporate lawyer had planted a seed of doubt, a poison weed wondering if Lillian would take the money, if she'd been playing him all along. He found himself driving to her ranch without even thinking about it, propelled by a raw need to hear the truth from her own mouth. One look at her face in the barn told him everything. Thornton had been there. You take his offer? Caleb asked. No time for howdy-do. Lillian shot back. I was about to ask you the same thing. She slapped down the bridle she was mending. That man just stood right here making his threats and spouting his lies. He made sure I knew he'd offered you a bigger pile of cash, saying we'd both be fools not to take it. I'm not taking it, he said flatly. "And why should I believe you?" she countered, her eyes flashing. "This whole partnership was built on what we needed, Caleb, not on trust. For all I know, you're just checking to see if I'm going to fold so you can cut your own deal. That ain't why I'm here. Then why are you?" She stepped closer, closing the space between them. "Because I am tired of this dance. I'm tired of pretending this is just about water rights when we both know it's about a whole lot more. I want the truth from you, Caleb. Right now. Even if it's ugly." The words hung there, a challenge he couldn't sidestep. "I'm here," he said, his voice low and steady, "because the thought of you selling out and leaving made me realize something. I ain't just fighting for this ranch anymore. I'm fighting for us." Lillian froze, her face a mask. "That's a mighty big thing to say." "It's the God's honest truth," he replied. "So what if I told you I was taking his offer?" She tested him. "What if I said I was tired of fighting?" His heart clenched, but he met her gaze. "Then I'd help you pack. I'd make sure you got every last dime you were owed. And then I'd stay here and fight him alone, because somebody has to." Tears welled in her eyes, and before he could read them, she closed the distance and kissed him. It was a kiss that washed away 12 years of loneliness and loss in a single moment. When they finally pulled apart, she rested her forehead against his. "I'm not selling," she whispered. "I'm not leaving." They stood like that for a long while, just holding on as the March wind howled outside. The meeting with the Water Commission was in the state capitol. It was them, a handful of ranchers, against Thornton and his whole team of slick city lawyers. It didn't look like much of a fair fight, but their side was built on something money couldn't buy. The hearing went on for 3 long days. The corporation went first, showing fancy charts and talking about how outdated ranching was hurting the land. They made it sound like they were the good guys, there to save the valley from itself. It was a smooth, professional lie, and Caleb watched the politicians nod along. Then it was their turn. They showed their own proof, plain and simple. Their surveyors proved the corporation's drills were the ones draining the water table. Their records showed it was corporate land that was using up all the water. The numbers didn't lie, and they tore the corporation's pretty story to shreds. Then Lillian took the stand. She wasn't just a rancher anymore. She was a force of nature. "The corporation talks about management," she said, her voice ringing clear as a bell. "But what they mean is control. Control by folks who don't have to live with the mess they make. We can't afford to ruin our land, because it's all we have. When they've sucked this valley dry, they'll just move on to the next one." She held up pictures of their healthy grasslands next to photos of the corporation's eroded soil. The truth was right there for everyone to see. "You want to know who ought to control the water in this valley?" she asked the room. "It's the people who will still be here in 50 years. The families who've cared for this land for generations and who plan on passing it down to their own." Lillian spoke of passing the land to their children, just like their grandparents did. She told them their duty was not to faceless stockholders who only cared about profit. When she finished, you could have heard a pin drop. The politicians looked like they were finally questioning the slick story they had been sold. The corporation's lawyers tried to tear her down, asking about her motives and her history with Caleb. But Lillian answered every question with a calm strength that made them look small and petty. Then, their own lawyer, Thomas Brennan, came forward with a surprise. He held up a stack of papers that made Thornton turn white as a ghost. "These are internal communications from the corporation," Brennan announced. "They prove that while they talked about sustainability in public, they planned to drain this valley dry in private. It was never about saving the land. It was about owning it all." The room went wild. The politicians demanded to see the proof. The company lawyers started yelling about lawsuits and stolen property. But it was too late. Everyone saw the greed behind their pretty words. The vote was delayed for weeks. Back home, Caleb and Lillian waited, not knowing if they had won or just bought a little more time. But one thing was certain. The fight had turned neighbors into a family. They had found something worth fighting for together. The news came in late May. The telegram went to Brennan, and then riders fanned out across the valley. The commission had voted no. The corporation's proposal was dead. The celebration at Martha's ranch that night was something to see. For the first time in a long time, the valley felt like it was truly theirs. Later, Caleb stood outside under the stars. Lillian came and slipped her hand into his. "Thornton cleared out this morning," she said softly. "The whole company is pulling up stakes and heading for Wyoming. They think the folks there will be an easier target." "We won," Caleb said, the words feeling real for the first time. "We survived," she corrected. "Close enough for now." He turned to her, seeing his own tired hope reflected in her eyes. "So, what's next for us?" "We rebuild," she said. "We get back to living instead of just fighting. Together. That is, if you are really staying this time." "I'm staying," he said, pulling her close. "For this land, for our friends. But mostly, Lillian, I am staying for you. Somewhere along the way, I stopped trying to make up for the past and started building something new with you. Something better." "Better how?" she whispered. "Honest," he said. "Equal. Based on who we are now, not who we were as kids. I loved you then, Lillian, but I love you a whole lot more now. You have become something truly special, and I'm hoping you will give me the chance to be special right alongside you." His heart pounded in the quiet that followed. He had just laid his whole soul out on the table, not knowing if their hard-won partnership could ever be something more. "I am not an easy woman to love," she finally admitted. "I am stubborn as a mule, and I still have nightmares about losing this ranch or waking up to find you have run off again. Then I will be there when you wake up. I am not going anywhere, and I will prove it to you every single day." "That is a mighty big promise, Caleb. I know. And I'm fixing to finally keep one." She kissed him then, a slow and soft kiss that tasted like a new beginning. "All right, Caleb, we will give this a try. But you should know, I am thinking about the long haul. Marriage, combining our ranches, the whole deal. Is that a proposal? It is a statement of my intentions." "You want a real proposal? You will have to do a whole lot better than standing here in Martha's yard smelling of whiskey and cattle." And as spring turned into a hot Texas summer, Caleb kept his word. His proposal was not one big gesture, but 1,000 small ones. They tore down the fence between their properties, letting their cattle roam as one herd. One morning, Lillian found partnership papers on her kitchen table. Tucked inside was a line about marriage, written down like it was just a fact. She rode over to Caleb's place, tackled him clean off his horse, and laughed. "Yes," she told him. "They got married that September, right in the church where they all stood together against the corporation. Surrounded by friends who had become family, it felt just right. When Caleb put that ring on her finger, he knew he was finally home." The following spring, Lillian told him they were having a baby. Standing on the land his grandfather had settled, Caleb felt a peace he had never known. Their daughter, Catherine, was born in the winter, filling the quiet old house with life. As he held her for the first time, Caleb finally understood what his father had tried to say. The past does not get to decide your future. A person's mistakes do not have to be the end of their story. Running from trouble is never the answer for things that truly matter. He had come back just to handle his father's affairs, but ended up finding a reason to put down roots for good. He had found purpose and a love that was stronger than doubt. The corporation never came back. Their little valley stood as proof that a community standing together could protect its own. Caleb learned that real courage was about the choice to stay and build even when you are scared. He once thought freedom meant running away. Now he knew it came from committing your heart to one place and one person and standing up for that choice. Their love was not the easy kind from storybooks. It was the hard-won kind, built by two people who had known loss, but chose each other all the same. They built something real and lasting from the pieces of what was broken. And in the quiet of their life together, that was more than enough. It was everything. This content was carefully researched, developed, and manually edited by our team to deliver meaningful stories with valuable life lessons. Every narrative is crafted to entertain, inspire, and empower our audience. We believe that great stories can change lives, and we are committed to bringing you content that matters. Thank you for being part of our community.